And as a lawyer, you don't want to do the same thing
Right.
over and over.
Right. Monotony is not good when you're practicing law.
Right,
Sure.
right.
And
frankly, the other thing, the benefit to it for Florida and for the lawyers too, is that you solve a problem in one area and then you realize that it has application to the rest
Right.
of your docket.
Absolutely.
And it becomes a great way to sort of cross-pollinate the subject matters.
And the gangs, are they mostly young kids? What did you find about these gangbangers? Are they 15, 16, 17-year-olds?
A lot of them are, and that's a sad part of it. But the more frightening part of it was that some of it's multi-generational at this point. And so, I tell a story about a gang that we prosecuted here locally, and we had gone into the house on a search warrant to look for an automatic weapon that had been used in a drive-by shooting that was used to revenge a killing of one of the brothers who lived in the house. And so that brother was now dead. The other brother who was involved in the drive-by shooting was arrested and is now going to spend a long time in prison. But probably the saddest part of that case was the plastic little handgun that we found under the bed that in little boy handwriting said Oscar's Gat. And that was the 7-year-old little brother who wanted to have his own gun too. And it's that sort of multi-generational cycle that we have to break.
And are they pretty much divided by ethnic groups? Because I hear all these things about these Brazilian gangs and Jamaican gangs, and I'm wondering, are they all form gangs based on a background, or are they...
There are some.
How does that work?
Yeah, there are some that because of trust issues, they go with people that they know and that they all have come from the same hometown, or they've, they grew up in the same
country or same background.
Right. I'm sorry. I mean the same hometown in a foreign country.
Right.
Or they've all grown up within the same 3 blocks. I mean, we certainly have plenty of domestic gang issues. It's not just foreign-born nationals who've come to the United States.
Was there one gang who's the worst here in Florida?
Well, I think probably the worst gang is the gang that lives in your neighborhood, regardless of who they are. And so sadly, we saw gangs in places, large metropolitan areas like here, but also in small little towns like Sawdust, Florida, which is 80 miles outside of Tallahassee. And Sawdust, Florida, had been taken over by a group there called the 773 Boys. And law enforcement, I'm not going to say law enforcement was afraid of them because they weren't. They kept taking them on every chance they could.
And what did that stand for, 773?
Believe it or not, it was the house where some of these guys had grown up. It was their street address. But they had tattooed it on themselves and carved it on their vehicles, and it was how they identified themselves. But in a small community, frankly, gang problems can be that much worse because it's so much easier for a small group to take over an entire community through fear and intimidation. And that's partly the hardest problem of some of the gang prosecutions. It's the eyewitnesses. You just don't have them. 100 people may have seen it, but nobody remembers what they saw when you come to ask them about
I certainly wouldn't want to be the one testifying against
right.
a large street gang.
Right. And you don't want to, and you don't want your 14-year-old daughter who may have been on the sidewalk when it happened to do it, to testify against them. And it just becomes a very difficult cycle. And that's partly why we moved into that area with the racketeering statute, and it became an effective tool for us.
Well, speaking of immunity and testifying against people, when we get back, we're going to talk about how you did the only prosecution of current members of the Witness Protection Program for criminal acts from within the BOP. So we'll talk about that when we get back. We're going to take a quick break. Welcome back to the Justice Hour on WBZT 1230. I'm your host, Lisa Macy, and joining me this evening is William Shepard, an attorney at Holland and Knight, I should say a partner at Holland and Knight, and former statewide prosecutor for the state of Florida. We have a few minutes left. If you want to call in with a question or comment, 561-844-6167 or toll free 1-800-889-0267. Witness Protection Program. People who are in that,
Yes, they
Basically,
are.
they're given a break. They've gotten immunity out of crimes that they were really a part of, but I guess they're placed in the witness protection program, most of them, because they need protection against their own criminal buddies, correct?
Right.
And got to love these names. White Boy Rick Wersch, is that how you pronounced his name? And Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols.
Right. That was a case that I got involved and handled personally for almost a year, frankly. And it's the kind of case that you really have to dig into, and that's what statewide prosecution allowed me to do, because I had the ability and the resources working with law enforcement around the state to tap into different things. And those two guys really opened my eyes to the witness protection program. It's frankly a great program that is run by professionals at the Bureau of Prisons and also by the U.S. Marshal Service. We're most familiar with the sort of Hollywood image of the guys who get a new government name and move on, and a fancy new job and a fancy new car and a new life for themselves.
Right.
And
is that what happens, or is that just in the movies?
That's partly what happens.
Okay.
That's partly what happens for people who are out and they're supervised by the U.S. Marshal Service. But there's a whole other component that's run by the Bureau of Prisons, and that's for sentenced inmates who, through their own cooperation with law enforcement, have made it difficult, if not impossible, for them to live in a general population setting at the Bureau of Prisons. So if you can't,
so they get out of prison?
No, they're in a full prison. It's like a regular prison, except every there
is in the witness
is
protection
part of the program,
and they're
right.
committing crimes while serving a sentence in prison.
Yeah, these two guys were very entrepreneurial. It was a sense that they'd had about them their whole lives.
Well, I remember they caught those people in prison who were doing tax fraud.
That's a horrible problem, but
they're filing. I guess the IRS isn't clever enough to think, well, I'm sending a refund to a federal or to a state prison. They don't catch on to that.
No,
how does that work exactly?
I think they'd catch on to that. That typically involves people on the outside who are helping the inmates on the inside. But this case that I worked was a case where these guys were operating on what's known as the attorney-client phone. Of course, that's attorney-client privilege is a sacrosanct privacy matter that allows all of us to be able to speak to our attorneys candidly about things that we may have concerns about.
I didn't realize they have a separate phone for that in prison.
They do, because regular phones are monitored.
Right.
And so this phone is unmonitored. And, some institutions have it, others don't, because the way these gentlemen are housed, it's an issue for them because their lawyers can't come to visit them, and they're housed there from all around the country.
Okay, because they're in the special program.
Right, and many of them do, frankly, have a variety of different legal issues, and sometimes they need to be able to speak to the prosecutor on their case, or they need to be able to speak to the FBI agent or DEA agent they're working with. And so there are substantive law enforcement reasons why you want them to have access to an unrecorded phone as well. But
so then you had a wiretap the unrecorded phone?
So what happens? What happened
very convoluted.
Werschy, and this is all public record because we charged and convicted them, but Werschy had been quite the celebrity drug dealer in Detroit in the late 80s when crack was first making its appearance, and Kid Rock actually wrote a song about him. And Werschy used to hold press conferences and talk about what a successful drug dealer he was. And he was convicted of drug dealing, as you might imagine, and was sentenced to a life term, and later cooperated against a number of Detroit City police officers who were involved on the mayor's staff with smuggling drugs for Werschy. And he worked with the DEA to establish that case and the FBI. But once he got into prison, as time went on, he developed an interest and like for fast cars. And he decided he needed to own a bunch of them, and he wanted to move a bunch of them around, and he wanted to deal in stolen cars. And so he got on the phone and started working as if he was talking to his attorney, but through the cooperation of people on the outside, created a phony attorney phone and law enforcement would call the number that was registered to an attorney in the state of Michigan.
They'd answer the phone and say, law offices.
They'd answer the phone and say, law office. And then he'd spend the next couple of hours, running his cars. And one of his cellmates there, who he became close with, was a gentleman named Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols. And Mr. Nichols was active about the same time as Wershey was.
You wonder why they get into these criminal enterprises when their names like White Boy Rick and Lorenzo Fat Cat.
I don't think Fat Cat was his given name.
No, but somehow they get these names.
They do. And so Cat was convicted of some very serious and ruthless crimes, was involved in a number of really heinous cases in Brooklyn and Jamaica, Queens. And over the course of time, he ended up in prison serving a life term as well. And he was involved with this in Wershey. And so the issue became, how do you prosecute people that you can't identify and that the government won't even admit they have? When I first started the case, the detective, Les Cravens, and I, who were working from Miami, and we would call and they say, "Oh, I'm sorry, we don't have Mr. Wershey. Is he? Do you see him on the website, or perhaps you'd like to call the 800 number?" And it was just one of these things. Well, I know you're doing your job, and you're supposed to tell me you don't have him, but you do, and he's committing crimes from within inside your prison. And so once we were able to work through those sort of administrative issues, prove our law enforcement bona fides, and develop the confidence with the Bureau of Prisons, they could not have been more helpful, and they were frankly the key to the successful prosecution of that case.
Well, you spent all this time basically as the white knight. You're the good guy, and now you're defending these bad guys. Well, maybe I'm sure not all your clients are guilty, because.
I think that it's an interesting issue for people who are outsiders, who are outside the law. But lawyers like you and I, we understand that part of, frankly, the value of the system that protects all of us is a vigorous defense. And when I was a prosecutor, I always tried to be thoughtful and not overreach my bounds. But many times in my career, the proper path was pointed out to me by an aggressive defense attorney who showed weaknesses in my case.
Right. So now if someone gets a grand jury subpoena,
right, exactly,
they can call you up.
Right. So
you can
that's
help them.
Yeah, yes, I can, frankly. And that's sort of the work that I do now. And whether it's an individual that finds himself the target of a grand jury, a state or federal matter, or frankly, healthcare fraud is a significant area. A lot of regulatory matters, SEC matters, things that are sort of quasi-criminal that you might not realize as an individual could have criminal consequences to you. Those are the times when you really need to get somebody involved who's an expert, as opposed to just the guy who lives down the street who happens to be a lawyer.
I want to thank you so much for your time tonight, Bill. You were great, and you have so many more things. I'll have to have you back to tell more of these amazing prosecutions you've done and hear some more of your great defense things that you'll have, and probably see some of them on TV soon. Do you want to give out a website? Do you have an email address, website, or telephone number if people have some questions or they get a grand jury subpoena?
Sure.
They need someone to contact.
Our website at Holland Tonight is just HK Law, and the phone number that you can contact me is 561-650-8338.
Well, thanks again.
Well, thanks for having me, Lisa, and thanks for this show.
Thank you to WBZT, to Pete for more great work on the board, and to Francisco Colon at Luzamundo for wonderful video work. He's in there videotaping the show this evening. And thank you all for listening. For more information on advertising or sponsorship opportunities, you could reach me at 561-361-8528. Go to the Justice Hour website, www.lisamacci.com. Sign up for their weekly newsletter with information on upcoming guests and events. Email me and let me know you're listening. Lisa at lisamacy.com. Find me on Facebook. Follow me on Twitter. Next week, Jerry Roden, I can't call him a DUI expert, but I'll call him a DUI phenom, is going to be here, an attorney to guest hosts. And if you have any questions about DUI traffic tickets, Jerry is phenomenal. So give us a call next week. He'll be filling in for me. God bless you and your family. And remember to keep listening to the one and only Justice Hour, because if you don't know your rights, you just don't have any rights.